today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue.
You have a man who's led a country that had the most beautiful cities that they demolished, had the most beautiful domes. Those domes are the most beautiful.
But it's
in
all
the world.
Russia's. But that's Russia's fault, though, Mr. President. Russia
They're
did
all
the
demolished. 1,000-year-old domes, and everything's demolished. I mean, it's like a demolition site. It's sort of like Gaza. In fact, it's more. At least Gaza has a couple of buildings standing.
Right.
I mean, this place. You take a look at the demolition of so many of those cities, and and all those people are killed, never to come back again.
But Mr. President, that's all. That's Vladimir Putin's fault. Don't you agree?
I get tired of listening to it. I'll tell you what. I've seen it enough. And then he complains that he's not at a meeting that we're having with Saudi Arabia trying to intermediate a peace. Well, he's been at meetings for 3 years with a president who didn't know what the hell he was doing.
Vladimir Putin is a liar, a murderer, and responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. And that's bad by itself. But you know what's worse? It's when you employ tactics that intentionally terrorize the population. Now, Senator Shaheen talked about the power grid. I was in that meeting. She was talking about, let's talk about systematically how this mind works, the mind of Vladimir Putin, the leadership of Russia. It's very cold in Ukraine, very, very cold in the wintertime. And they have tried to systematically deny them heat over the winter to freeze them out. They've had to spend millions of dollars hardening substations just to prevent families, hospitals, critical businesses, first responders from having power. That's how this man thinks. But that's not bad enough. Shortly after they invaded Ukraine and they got the surprise of their life that the Ukrainian people were willing to fight and die for their country, and they've done it in a way that Putin could not have possibly imagined. Putin should be embarrassed. A so-called world power got repulsed by what now is the largest army in Europe, standing army. It wasn't when the invasion occurred. And just with our help through materials, they've held off Russia for 3 years. Putin probably understood at some point that he wasn't going to be able to win it through conventional tactics. So what does he go to? Terrorist tactics. The same sort of tactics he uses in Africa with mercenaries, terrorizing populations, indiscriminately killing people. That is what Vladimir Putin does every single day, 24/7, 365, around the globe. I want to thank Senator Shaheen for actually a long-term friendship and vision that she had back in 2018 when she came to me and wanted to reconstitute the Senate NATO Observer Group. It could not have been a better time for us to pay more attention to this very important alliance. But it's also right now today, 4 days away from the 3-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, very important to talk about the nature of Vladimir Putin and the tactics that they use to terrorize populations. President Putin in October, prior to the invasion in February, said that he was sending troops to an area to do a training exercise. While we were getting intelligence that it looked like more than that, he was already lying to the world by saying, we're just going to train up our soldiers a little bit more. And then after the first part of the year, going into January, he said, well, we're doing the training exercise. It just coincidentally happens to be along the Ukrainian border, but it's just a training exercise. And then he creates any number of pretexts to then talk about how provocative Ukraine is, operating a democracy within their borders, and he creates the pretext for a special military operation, invading Ukraine, trying to finish what he started when he invaded Crimea back in 2014. he decides to allow, under orders, Russian military to go into a community of about 200,000 people. That's roughly the size of the community I live in, North Carolina, just north of Charlotte. Imagine what they're doing. They are going through the city and indiscriminately, when somebody walks past them, shooting them, sometimes with .50 caliber weapons and tank armor, murdering them, stacking them up in mass graves. I went to this site. I saw it firsthand. This is how he's trying to win the war, because he can't win the hearts and minds of Ukrainian people. He's destroyed the hopes and dreams of anybody that's lived in the Soviet era. And he wants that to reemerge. And he's willing to do anything, including terrorizing innocent civilians, to break their will. But thank God the Ukrainian people are the brave people that they are, because this hardened them. This made them go onto a battlefield and live in trenches 24 hours a day, repulsing the Russian invasion. There is no moral person on this planet who can consider Putin to have a legitimate reason to effect this sort of carnage. And I saw it firsthand. And I will never be able to forget it. And what the American people and the world population will never be able to forget either is the aftermath of appeasing Vladimir Putin. Ladies and gentlemen, China is already helping Russia. North Korea has sent thousands of troops, and North Korea don't really care about life. They've allowed 4,000 to 5,000 of their soldiers die on the battlefield within 6 weeks of getting on the ground. They are throwing body after body after body, trying to kill and break the will of the Ukrainian people. And it's just unacceptable. So, look, I'm a Republican. I support President Trump, and I believe that most of his policies on national security are right. I believe his instincts are pretty good. But what I'm telling you, whoever believes that there is any space for Vladimir Putin in the future of a stable globe better go to Ukraine. They better go to Europe. They better invest the time to understand that this man is a cancer and the greatest threat to democracy in my lifetime. And it will be a cancer that spreads into the South China Sea, into Taiwan, and metastasizes across the globe. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you that Vladimir Putin is a liar, a murderer, and a man responsible for ordering the systematic torture, kidnapping, and rape of innocent civilians, believe me, because the evidence is mile high. So, for those of us who have invested some time to understand this, believe me when I tell you this is important to every single one of you. If you believe that Ukraine is a country an ocean away and not relevant to our national security, think again. The world is small. The world is watching. The strength of our alliances are on the line, and the future of democracy in the world is on the line if we do anything less than defeat Vladimir Putin. Thank you, Mr. President.